And now we're looking at the stories that we're going to be reading from Winesburg, Ohio by Sherwood Anderson. We're reading Godliness, which is a 4-part story. It focuses on 3 characters in 4 separate stories. And then we're reading Adventure concerning Alice Hindman. Notice each of the stories is attached to a person, and each person, of course, will have grabbed a truth, or perhaps more than one truth in some cases. Jesse Bentley certainly has more than one truth. The Thinker concerning Seth Richmond. The Untold Lie concerning Ray Pearson. The stories are attached to these people, and the people are named Alice Hindman, almost as if you're part of the Winesburg, Ohio community, and you know who Alice is. And all of the other characters definitely know who Alice is. They all know and talk about one another in the stories because it's a small community. So we're going to start out with Godliness, and Godliness most certainly shows that idea that we've seen in the introduction to the story. Character who's grabbed onto one or more truths and made them false by excessively focusing on them and living his life by them. So it's a tale in 4 parts concerning Jesse Bentley. As with other readings that we've looked at in these video chats, I've highlighted in purple the passages that we're going to especially focus on so that you can see them as I scroll. So let's go to Godliness, a tale in 4 parts. And I'm going to go to my first purple passage, which is a description of Jesse Bentley, who is the story Godliness. It's the story of Jesse Bentley in the first 2 parts. Jesse Bentley is described as the owner and overlord of it all, of the whole farm. And owner and overlord, owner, of course, is just the person who owns it. But as soon as he calls him the overlord, the writer refers to him as overlord, it takes on a slight negative tinge. An overlord is a ruler and not necessarily a beneficent ruler. So he's someone who controls everyone on the farm. By the time the American Civil War had been over for 20 years, that part of northern Ohio where the Bentley farms lay had begun to emerge from pioneer life. Jesse then owned machinery for harvesting grain. He had built modern barns, and most of his land was drained with carefully laid tile drain. But in order to understand the man, we will have to go back to an earlier day. A few things interesting, the references to the American Civil War, that sort of lies in the background of these collections of stories, and that is the story of conflict within the United States, between people in the United States. Also, reminder that we're in a small town in northern Ohio. And also, the idea that there was once a pioneer time, pioneer life being, I suppose, where we lived simply and worked the farms with our own hands, this is where we're emerging from. And Jesse, in particular, who is very focused on wealth. One of his truths is definitely gathering wealth. Very quickly moved to gathering machinery to harvest the grain, which of course is good because he can harvest the grain more quickly, but bad insofar as that all of the people who had formerly harvested the grain are now out of work. I suppose they run and repair the machines. He had built modern barns, and he drains the land for his own use, so he gets rid of the wetlands in order to plant more and make more money. That last sentence in this passage is interesting. In order to understand the man, we will have to go back to an earlier day. It's interesting because that reference to understanding the man suggests that there is probably something difficult to understand about him. You wouldn't say, let's try to understand this person, unless the person was difficult to understand. So right in the early introduction to this story about Jesse Bentley, we learn he is an overlord, which has a negative tinge, he's controlling, and also that he's difficult to understand, and that if you were to understand him, you have to look at how he grew up, an earlier day. So Sherwood Anderson, or the narrator in this story, rather, who heard the stories from the old writer that are written by Sherwood Anderson, is telling us that Jesse Bentley is a complicated character. And he tells us about Jesse Bentley's father and brothers. He had all of these older brothers and a father who owned the farm. And, whoops, I just scrolled too far. Here's the description of the family. The 4 young men of the family worked hard all day in the fields. They ate heavily of coarse, greasy food, and at night slept like tired beasts on beds of straw. Into their lives came little that was not coarse and brutal, and outwardly they were themselves coarse and brutal. Now, this description is not really of a simple pioneer life. Coarse, greasy, beasts on beds of straw, and brutal, definitely negative connotations. These are not people living, you could say, a simple pioneer life. The writer is saying these are people who are living brutal and coarse, heavy lives. They are not sensitive or empathetic or kind people. They're beastly in a negative way. So again, Jesse Bentley's history here is not looking positive. And this gets reinforced when we read about his brother, Enoch Bentley. This gives us a sense of the family. The older one of the boys who struck his father, old Tom Bentley, in other words, he's elderly, with the butt of a teamster's whip. That would be a very thick, hard whip. And the old man seemed likely to die. Okay, this is horrifying enough on its own, and that is that the son has hit his father so hard that he's knocked him out and he looks like he's going to die. For days, this son, Enoch, lay hid in the straw in the loft of the stable, ready to flee if the result of his momentary passion turned out to be murder. So it was just an accident. I accidentally, in a moment of passion, whacked my dad with this whip, and now he's going to die. And now he's waiting in the, he looks like he's a fugitive, right? He's in the straw in the loft of the barn hiding. He was kept alive with food brought by his mother, who also kept him informed of the injured man's condition. So the whole family is complicit in this. I don't know what's good or bad here, and that's why believing in truths as if they were one way and only one way is wrong, because there's gray areas in here. He was kept alive with food, but I'm glad his mother's keeping him alive and supporting him. On the other hand, I'm sorry that his mother is perhaps not feeling more upset with Enoch for having almost killed his father. So his mother seems willing to support whatever illegal activities and fugitive behavior Enoch is doing. So when all turned out well, however, so father lives, he emerged from his hiding place and went back to the work of clearing land as though nothing had happened. So this clears up that there's very little empathy in this family. They don't dislike one another, but there's no sense of human emotion. It's just all work. Clear land, make money, have momentary passion, and hit someone with a whip, your father, and the rest of the family will support you so that you can get out and clear more land. We learn in the very next that the Civil War came and brought a sharp turn to the fortunes of the Bentleys. It was responsible for the rise of our main character, the youngest son. He's the youngest of 4, Jesse. Enoch, Edward, Harry, and Will Bentley all enlisted in the war, and before the long war ended, they were all killed. So all of the elder brothers die, and Jesse, the youngest son, inherits. And Jesse's quite thrilled with this, and he feels as if God has arranged it. So here's our description of Jesse Bentley when he takes over the farm. Jesse has been away becoming a minister. When Jesse Bentley came home to the farm and began to take charge of things, remember he is an overlord, he was a slight, sensitive-looking man of 22. Notice he obviously doesn't fit in with his coarse, brutal brothers who are strong clearing the land. He's slight and sensitive. At 18, he had left home to go to school to become a scholar, he's thoughtful, and eventually to become a minister of the Presbyterian Church, so he's deeply religious. All through his boyhood, he had been what in our country was called an odd sheep. He's a bit weird, and he had, this is no surprise, had not got on with his brothers. Of all the family, only his mother had understood him, and she was now dead. Of course, his mother also understood Enoch when he nearly killed their father, so Mom seems very understanding. So he takes over the farm, and the rest of the town in Winesburg is smiling at the idea of him trying to handle this work. They think he's not going to be able to do it. And there was indeed good cause to smile. By the standards of his day, Jesse did not look like a man at all. He was small and very slender and womanish of body, and true to the traditions of young ministers, wore a long black coat and a narrow black string tie. So he actually looks pretty narrow, right? You picture him in this long black coat and a narrow black string tie, walking around. He would seem a little intimidating. He brings with him a woman that he had married in the city. Notice the woman he had married in the city does put some distance. He doesn't seem too connected to him. And you hear the description of what happens to her. Jesse's wife did soon go under. Notice the use of the go under, the metaphor, almost like she's a swimmer who sinks. And that was, perhaps, Jesse's fault. A farm in the northern Ohio in the hard years after the Civil War was no place for a delicate woman, and Catherine Bentley was delicate. Jesse was hard with her, as he was with everybody about him in those days. She tried to do such work as all the neighbor women about her did, and he let her go on without interference. She helped to do the milking, did part of the housework, made the beds for the men, and prepared their food. And for a year, she worked every day from sunrise until late at night, and then after giving birth to a child, she died. So she no sooner comes in, but he works her to death, and she dies. As for Jesse Bentley, although he appears to be delicately built, there was something within him that could not easily be killed. And given everything we've learned about him, that not easily be killed is not necessarily a positive. It seems like, too mean to die. He had brown curly hair and gray eyes that were at times hard and direct. So he at times wavering and uncertain. So he goes between uncertainty but also hard and direct. And notice, of course, very little description of any grief he may have had over the death of his wife. His mouth was like the mouth of a sensitive and very determined child. So he's like a toddler who's having a fit. Jesse Bentley was a fanatic, and indeed, he's a fanatic. He was a man born out of his time and place, and for this he suffered and made others suffer. Never did he succeed in getting what he wanted out of life, and he did not know what he wanted. So his truth is he wants. He just wants, and he will take, and he will take, and he will never feel as if he's gotten what he wanted, because he doesn't truly know what he wants. Nothing will fill that empty space. So he ends up being a very cruel man. And we will hear the story of how that plays out within his extended family and the generations that come later as we read this story. And I'm going to stop here now that we've looked at Jesse Bentley's character, and we'll move on with this in our next video chat. Thank you.